Good evening and welcome to Dateline News. Tonight's episode is on gentrification
Dun dun dun.
in East Austin. I'm Jay Ricketts,
I'm Hector Ramirez.
And I'm Stephen Fox.
and we'll be coming to you live. To better understand this social phenomenon, we must first understand what is gentrification. Gentrification is any facet of urban renewal that inevitably leads to the displacement of the occupying demographic. This is a common and widespread controversial topic and term in urban planning. Gentrification is a general term for the arrival of wealthier people in an existing urban district, a related increase in rents and property values, and changes in a district's character and culture. The term is often used negatively, suggesting the displacement of poor communities by rich outsiders. But the effects of gentrification are complex and contradictory, and its real impact varies. Many aspects of the gentrification process are desirable. Who wouldn't want to see reduced crime, new investment in buildings and infrastructure, and increased economic activity in their neighborhoods? Unfortunately, the benefits of these changes are often enjoyed disproportionately by the new arrivals, while the established residents find themselves economically and socially marginalized. Gentrification has been the cause of painful conflict in many American cities, often along racial and economic fault lines. Neighborhood change is often viewed as a miscarriage of social justice, in which wealthy, usually white newcomers are congratulated for improving a neighborhood whose poor minority residents are displaced by skyrocketing rents and economic change. Gentrification can first be seen in the U.S. in the 1930s with the beginning of the New Deal. The New Deal was brought about after the Great Recession, in which new policies and programs were brought about to help jumpstart the economy. The New Deal actually subsequently brought out more forms of gentrification and racial segregation by instituting redlining, which excludes minority neighborhoods from federal subsidies and other mortgages and housing opportunities. On the right here, you can see they were deemed economically unstable. Another aspect of the New Deal was the Fair Housing Act of 1949. It brought about Title I, II, and III. These different titles brought about different access that helped gentrification occur within the U.S. Title I brought about funding for urban renewal projects, like in East Austin. Title II brought about the Federal Housing Administration and mortgage insurance, which was part of redlining that allowed certain demographics to obtain low-cost mortgages to purchase homes. Title III brought about funding to public housing units, like projects. In Austin, historical policies that made this dynamic of gentrification prevalent were part of the 1928 Master Plan. The 1928 Master Plan aimed at pushing minority groups east of the city and all industrial and undesirable businesses with it. More specifically in Austin, the Santa Rita Courts were the first low-income public housing project, which is sent to the east side of Austin to help send low-income minority groups to the east side. Another way for them to execute their 1928 master plan, another way that gentrification occurred within Austin was the refusal of public works to segregated areas. To help move minority groups east, public works and different programs offered by the government were turned off for those with minorities unless they headed to the east side where they were still open for use. Another large dynamic that played into Austin's historical policies that led to gentrification was the University of Texas. The University of Texas was granted eminent domain by the city of Austin, which allowed them to take any land or business that they felt needed to expand the university. By doing this, it forced residents eastward and as far as the University of Texas needed to complete its needs. Now, here's Hector Ramirez to explain the challenges that people face because of the cause of gentrification.
Thanks, Jay. So how does gentrification affect people like you or me? Gentrification brings many great renovations to neighborhoods, from reinvented establishments to renovated roads and public places. This all sounds like a good deal to me, Jay, but does gentrification also bring some ramifications to the residents' culture? As the neighborhood undergoes gentrification, it first starts with certain kinds of people. For example, young people move to certain neighborhoods to be closer to their work or school. This first wave of residents attracts other residents and businesses, or subsequent waves, which are predominantly white and affluent. These businesses are meant to appeal to the young and affluent more so than the previous and less affluent residents of the area. For example, they bring coffee shops, yoga studios, organic produce grocery stores, and nightclubs, among other things. All this occurs mostly in areas that were previously neglected by the cities that had low property values and taxes. As gentrification occurs, new renovations and businesses raise the property values of the neighborhood, and there are visible shifts of racial, cultural, and economic aspects of the area. For example, in northern Denver between the years 2000 and 2010, the Latino population dropped from 65 to 38% after gentrification. The younger, more affluent, and predominantly white gradually replaces the lower income minorities, as there are many racial divisions when it comes to income. Cultural displacement is another problem that gentrification brings to the neighborhood. There is certain cultural capital, or the inherent worth of the culture or knowledge that one has, that the young and affluent bring with them to gentrified areas that does not fit with the culture of lower socioeconomic people that previously lived there. Going to expensive restaurants wearing an exclusive style of fashion, knowledge of artists or photographers, these are all considered to be higher in the cultural capital scale than the types of things that people with a lower social class economic status know or do. This higher cultural capital, or the non-financial social and cultural knowledge that promotes social mobility, such as knowledge about art, food, dress, and appearance, replaces other culture in the form of aforementioned establishments, which leads to cultural displacement. Things like murals or graffiti art are painted over. Establishments with cultural value to the residents of a neighborhood are demolished to make space for establishments that appeal to the gentrifiers, such as recently in Austin, the Pinata store, Jumpolin, was destroyed to make room for parking lots for South by Southwest. Sometimes public spaces are changed or removed, such as swimming pools in northern Denver, where the Latino population used to congregate and valued as a place where they can practice their culture. In Portland, art festivals in gentrified zones were seen as exclusive from the lower class population, as something that they could not really participate in. Lastly, gentrification causes property values and taxes to rise in the community, which is connected to the displacement of people who live there first. As property values increase, the income of those who live there do not. These older residents, who are mostly minorities, can no longer afford to live there and are forced to move somewhere else, leaving their lives and culture behind. Often, families who have lived there for many years are evicted by landlords to make room for new people that are moving in, as the area is now seen as renovated or better than it once was, and these new people bring money with them. When gentrification clears, only the young and affluent are left standing. The shops and establishments that used to be there are replaced by another coffee shop or winery. The visible culture or art form from the area is replaced by a statue commemorating the culture, though many see it as a gravestone. Newer and older residents experience this process differently. First, by not being able to afford to live in a certain area anymore, the older residents are forced to change everything from their lives, up to leaving a place they called home. Newer residents get a new place to live with rising property values, a mecca for higher cultural capital, and a place close to their work, and a grocery store nearby where they can buy organic flax seeds and charcuterie. Second, older residents experience a lessened sense of belonging after all the changes are made, and cannot recognize their community from what it used to be. For the most part, everyone enjoys a better place to live. Nobody doesn't like improved roads and public spaces, but when their culture is appropriated by others and ultimately displaced, the sense of home is gone. Lastly, and probably most importantly, there are many racial tensions that develop during gentrification. Whether we like it or not, everyone has inherent biases that shape the way we treat other races or cultures. This bias is conveyed in gentrified areas and how the older residents are seemingly treated by others. For the most part, the older residents are left out of important decisions in their neighborhood, instead only shaped by the newer residents so that they can build their own model neighborhood. Often, older residents are shunned or left out of new cultural events such as the art shows or music festivals that are built only to appeal to the affluent or in many cases white. That newer white residents are overtly racist. Far from it. It is just that many do not acknowledge the inherent bias in each of us, and acknowledging this bias is the best way to deal with many of these problems. Now we go on to a field reporter, Fox.
Thanks, Hector. It's a nice day outside, and, well, sort of. And today I'm here to talk to you about, how bias works out in the field and how gentrification is as a whole, and how difficult it is to have a conversation about such a tough topic. So today, what I want to start off with is, first off, everyone is biased. But, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Being biased doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't say anything about your character. We all just have these inherent impulses that make us who we are. So, to start off, back in the day, biases used to serve as a survival technique that helped us discern safe situations, safe people, and helped us overall just live. So, in current times, we still use this technique, but probably not as effectively as we used to because our environment is a lot different. We're not always out being attacked. So it's very tough for our bodies to get used to that. In studies, we've found out several different ways to test our biases, and one of these ways is called the IAT, or Implicit Association Test. Basically, this forces an individual to make associations between images of different people and words. And so these different associations end up giving a bigger overall picture of how people make associations, and it makes you do this so fast that you can't possibly put any conscious thought to this. And this leads me into, this second topic that I wanted to talk about, fast versus slow thinking. So essentially what this is about is, like the speed at which your brain processes images and makes associations. So when the brain processes an image, it goes through two different phases of thinking. The first is typically referred to as your fast thinking, which occurs within 80 milliseconds or so of you seeing an image. This is your gut impulse, and this is where your brain initiates a thought. It's just kind of that knee-jerk or snap reaction that you can't control at all, and that's kind of where your emotional responses come from. This is a lot of the issue that we have with implicit bias, because as human beings, we can't control that snap decision. 80 milliseconds is not enough time to think. So what researchers have studied is that after doing an fMRI scan of the brain, they've found out that human beings tend to make a conscious decision about an image or action at about 300 milliseconds. Point that our brain is able to slow down and think consciously about what we're seeing, and we can interpret this and act on it in a much, much simpler way. So it's important to work on this because, again, it's impossible to correct that initial impulse. And this is important because it allows us to understand that everyone is capable of having these initial snap decisions. So we have to be able to slow down our decisions as best we can, because if we don't, we end up running into these conflicts, because what we've said or done tends to not reflect what we actually think or want to do. So this brings me to my next point, that dialogue is actually a crucial and incredibly important thing to talk about in terms of gentrification. I have a special guest for you, straight out from the field. You all love him. You all want to be him. He's fantastic. Can you please come here and welcome with me my friend Bourbon? He is a master at the art of conversation, and he truly understands what the root causes and problems of gentrification are. So, without further ado, Bourbon, would you mind giving them an idea of what you think? Yeah? I think we're losing you. Bourbon. Well, anyway, I think you get the point. So what I'm getting at here is that these dialogues are extremely important to have, because without them you can't establish what sociologists term as a race-based resistance. These are essentially communities banding together to counteract the negative effects that gentrification can have on a community. Without these dialogues, people aren't on the same page, and as Hector told you, these newer residents don't always know what the ins and outs are of a community. It's important to have these conversations, and it's very important to understand that everyone has implicit bias, and if you try to confront it in the wrong way, people will get defensive and not want to listen to you.
You have it. Gentrification. That concludes our special on Dateline News. I'm Jay Ricketts.
I'm Hector Ramirez.
And I'm Stephen Fox.
Good day.